some positive leftist news with Paul Connolly.
Welcome to Positive Leftist News. I'm Paul from Marxism Today, and I'll be your narrator for this episode. Today we're going to be discussing some progressive developments that have taken place around the world in recent times. These developments haven't happened magically by themselves, but have been the result of people getting organised and fighting for a better future. Like the heroic revolutionaries in the Philippines and India out there putting their lives on the line every single day in the struggle against imperialism. Every single one of us has a part to play, no matter how big or how small, in the fight for liberation. So join up with your relevant workers' unions, tenants' unions, and revolutionary mass organisations to fight for a better tomorrow, and perhaps your activism too will soon feature on Positive Leftist News. Now, let's get into it. Around 150 artefacts considered sacred by the Lakota Sioux peoples were returned to them in a private ceremony this month. The artefacts had been stored at a small museum in Barre, Massachusetts for over a century. Members of the Oglala Sioux and Cheyenne River Sioux tribes travelled from South Dakota to take custody of the weapons, pipes, moccasins and clothing, including several items thought to have a direct link to the 1890 Wounded Knee Massacre in South Dakota. Ever since that Wounded Knee Massacre happened, genocides have been instilled in our blood, said Surrounded Bear aged 20, who travelled to Barre from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And for us to bring back these artefacts, that's a step towards healing. That's a step in the right direction. The ceremony marked the culmination of repatriation efforts that had been decades in the making. The items being returned are just a tiny fraction of an estimated 870,000 Native American artifacts, including nearly 110,000 human remains, in the possession of the nation's most prestigious colleges, museums, and even the federal government. They're supposed to be returned to the tribes under the 1990 Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, but returns have been very slow due to the enormous amount of red tape surrounding the process. However, there is hope. The Department of the Interior consulted with 71 tribes and Native Hawaiian organisations to draft proposed revisions to the Act to make it easier for Indigenous peoples to get proper repatriation and reburial of ancestors and cultural items. These proposed revisions are open for public comment until January 12, 2023. So if you live in the United States, consider adding your comment in support of the proposal to overwhelm the voices of the settlers who are commenting against the proposal. Link in the description box below. The remains of 18 Indigenous people have been returned to Australia by 2 British museums as part of the laborious and painstaking effort to recover thousands of ancestors stolen from their traditional lands, who now lie in more than 20 countries around the world. Over 1,660 ancestors have been returned since 1990, over 75% coming from Britain. The Australian government says the total number of ancestors held overseas is unknown, but that it is aware that there may be over 1,500 ancestors held by collecting institutions and private holders in more than 20 countries. Indigenous activists who have travelled around the world searching museums and scientific institutions for ancestral remains estimate that figure is actually much higher. The removal of the remains has been called the first stolen generation, and their absence continues to inflict enormous trauma on these peoples. All power to the oppressed peoples around the world suffering under the boot of colonial and neo-colonial tyranny. Imperialism will fall and liberation will be achieved. The government of India's northern state of Haryana has accepted the demands of 40,000 sanitation workers who were on strike against the non-payment of their salaries. The workers were also demanding regularisation of their jobs by ending the contractual system, along with payment of risk allowance and provision of safety equipment. Campaigning under the banner of the Centre of Indian Trade Unions, CITU, union leaders had initially called for a 2-day strike. However, the strike continued on as workers demanded action. Authorities were concerned as the protests also drew support from firefighters. Locals affected by the increasing heaps of rubbish across various cities were also putting pressure on the authorities to meet the workers' demands. A statement by Sunita, Vice President of Safi Karamcharis Sanitation Workers Union in Gohana, said, "The state authorities should provide equal wages for equal work and provide us with regular jobs, or we will start dumping garbage in front of houses." Birmati, the president of Sonapat District Sanitation Workers Union, also threatened that workers would resort to dumping rubbish near the houses of ruling BJP leaders if the authorities continued to ignore their demands. The power of this well-organised essential worker strike has proven undeniable as the workers' demands were met after 11 days of protests. Up the workers, up the Naxals, and here's to a red India in our lifetimes. On November 7th, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, or CUPE, was successful in forcing the Conservative Government of Ontario to repeal Bill 28, which imposed a contract on the workers and bans them from walking off the job. It also used the Charter's notwithstanding clause, a seldom used legislative loophole to shield the legislation from legal challenges. CUPE, whose rank and file includes education assistants, early childhood educators, school administrators and custodians, formed a coalition of labour unions not seen in the province for decades. After threatening a general strike, which has only happened a few times in Canadian history, the Conservative government backed down. This demonstrates how the bourgeoisie fears the power of organised labour. While this crucial battle was won, the war is far from over. CUPE workers still need to secure a fair contract with the state. But with their increased and enthusiastic level of organisation, the Conservative government is finding the union to be a force to be reckoned with. From the 14th to the 20th of October, youth activists from 14 countries and 17 organisations gathered in South Africa as part of the youth camp Pioneers of the Revolution, organised by Pan-Africanism Today and the International People's Assembly. Activists met to strengthen Pan-African unity and solidarity across social, economic and political struggles. Pan-Africanism Today Youth Coordination member Anel Sopazi explained that the 6-day programme came about as a consequence of discussions between the groups that affirmed that socialism is the only vehicle to realise a more equitable and just society, and that the youth forms an integral part of the struggle to mobilise and organise for its realisation. The aim of the youth camp was to emerge with a socialist programme that is actionable and practical. We were much more interested in solving the problems before us rather than diagnosing the crisis of capitalism of which we are much more aware. Solidarity with the Pan-African youth who were putting theory into practice. Victorious direct action pickets across Britain and Ireland against the British Council led to the compensation of an English teacher who was unjustly dismissed from her position without cause or reason. Lara, the teacher, was employed by the Impelum Group Employment Agency. According to Gabriela Cios, the leading rep on the case, precarious work is an issue across language teaching and especially within online teaching. When combined with employment through an agency, teachers are often left at the whims of capricious and exploitative employers. This is why it's so important to be a member of a union. Tom Leibowitz, chairperson of the TEFL Workers Union, stated, "Our understanding is that the British Council is moving a significant portion of their British-based English teaching work to Commensura, a subsidiary of the Impelum Group. The British Council must understand that they can't hide behind employment agencies. We're here to hold them to account." Good stuff. Remember, the union makes us strong. On Thursday, November 3rd, more than 50,000 Spanish workers in Madrid united under the leadership of trade unions in a mass mobilisation demanding an increase in wages on par with the soaring inflation. The mobilisation was organised by unions including the Workers' Commissions and the General Union of Workers, or UGT. Protesters chanted, "This crisis is not paid for by the working class, salary or conflict." As in many European countries, the Spanish cost of living, especially with respect to food and fuel, is soaring while wages remain stagnant. On the 14th, Spanish truckers called a strike to further protest the cost of living. Of the November 3rd event, UGT's Pepe Alvarez stated, "This mobilisation aims to ensure that the Spanish employers are fully aware that our slogan, salary or conflict, is not a joke. Where there has been conflict, we have obtained wages and dozens of agreements have been signed with increases that allow workers to maintain their purchasing power in companies with great benefits. On October 17th, the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, over 30 cities throughout Morocco mobilised to demand increased wages, decreased cost of necessities, and the release of all political prisoners. The 17th marked the third and final day of the protests organised by the Moroccan Social Front, FSM, to fight against neoliberal policies of exploitation, plunder, wealth accumulation and imperialism that have led to the cost of living crisis. FSM National Secretariat member Mouad El Jouri said, "At least 2/3 of Morocco's population is living in poverty today, in conditions of vulnerability. This poverty has not fallen from the sky, it is a consequence of the class policy of the ruling class. This is a policy based on rent, on monopoly and on dependence. Dependence on imperialist world capital. It is based on despotism." Solidarity with the Moroccan protesters demanding dignity for working people and for challenging the imperialist ruling classes and their comprador running dogs directly. In late October, a year after the military coup in Sudan, and as right-wing parties attempt to come to a power-sharing agreement coalesced by the US, hundreds of thousands of protesters across 19 cities took to the streets determined to overthrow the military junta. The notorious military responded with ferocious attacks on the people. Since the coup, an estimated 120 people have been killed, 7,000 injured, and hundreds arrested and tortured. Despite these horrifying shutdown attempts, every month hundreds of thousands have continued to rally against the junta. As Osama Said, a member of the Communist Party, stated, "This is a testimony to the determination of the Sudanese people to send the army back to the barracks." On the 9th of November, Toledo and Lucas counties in Ohio combined forces to use $1.6 million in funds from the American Rescue Plan Act to provide as much as $200 million in medical debt relief. Toledo City Council voted 7-5 to approve $800,000 of these funds for use by RIP Medical Debt. RIP Medical Debt is a Long Island-based non-profit founded by a former debt collection CEO. RIP Medical Debt uses their funds to purchase medical debt and then forgive their purchase debts. This marks the first time that public funds are being donated to RIP Medical Debt. This could open a pathway for future cancellation of medical debt using public funds. An estimated 41,000 people in Lucas County are burdened with medical debt. While this is far from a much-needed debt jubilee, this marks both a positive step forward for debt relief and a stark reminder that the for-profit healthcare system is not a viable way to provide care for our communities. In the largest US work stoppage of the year, thousands of academic workers at the University of California, UC, went on strike on November 14th over the university system's bargaining practices with their union, which is trying to secure higher wages. Some 48,000 teaching assistants, postdocs, researchers and graders on the front lines of teaching and research in California's prestigious public university system are seeking a minimum annual salary of $54,000, double what they make now, and increased childcare benefits. They also accused the university of not bargaining in good faith with their union, the United Auto Workers, or UAW. The average UC system graduate student worker makes $24,000 annually, nearly $15,000 less than the average apartment in Santa Cruz costs per year. Some workers have to resort to things like selling blood plasma twice a week or commuting from hours away just to make ends meet. As noted in an LA Times op-ed, some UC administrators receive $500,000 salaries. It's not so much a question of the system needing more money, but instead a matter of distributing that money more fairly. For these reasons, it's really no surprise that the University of California strike is not just the largest work stoppage of the year, it's the largest academic strike in higher education in US history. There's currently no end in sight for the strike, but the strikers have vocal support from many professors as well as students, and are committed to seeing this through. Negotiations have been happening for over a year. UC has had ample time to do right by these workers, but they instead chose to act in bad faith, and now the workers are fighting back. This will definitely be one for everyone to keep our eyes on. Best of luck to everyone involved in this. Hopefully next month's PLN will be able to tell the tale of your victory. On the 3rd of November at the UN General Assembly, 185 countries voted almost unanimously to remove the genocidal 60-year embargo that has deprived the Cuban people of more than $1 trillion. Cuban solidarity activist and co-executive director of the People's Forum, Manolo de los Santos, tweeted, "No other resolution at the UN has this level of consensus." The US, of course, voted against the resolution, having benefited from its war of attrition against Cuba since its progressive 1959 revolution successfully overthrew the US-backed puppet regime of Fulgencio Batista. At present, the blockade makes foreign trade and humanitarian aid with Cuba impossible. Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez stated, "More than 80% of the current Cuban population was born under the blockade. 3 decades have passed since this assembly began to demand every year the cessation of that policy, classified as an act of genocide and which has the effect of a permanent pandemic, of a constant hurricane, and is universally rejected." Additionally, hundreds of people across cities in Canada and North America have held demonstrations to demand an end to the blockade of Cuba. Claudia de la Cruz, co-executive director of the People's Forum, summarised the matter aptly to a crowd of hundreds gathered in New York City to protest the blockade. "The US dares to say that Cuba should remain on the terrorist list," she said. "Who calls the US government terrorists? The United States has dared to overthrow governments all across the globe." Thailand has legalised abortions up to the 20th week of pregnancy, an extension of a law passed in February 2021 which allowed termination within 12 weeks. Previously, abortions had been illegal, with few exceptions for cases such as pregnancy from rape or deformities. Under this new regulation, up until the 12th week, people with wombs can arrange to have the procedure carried out by a medical facility. Between the 12th and the 20th week of pregnancy, people must consult a practitioner to gain approval. Deputy Government spokesperson Trazali Trazer Anakul said the regulations call for people with wombs seeking abortion to be treated with openness, kindness, non-judgment, and to allow decisions on whether or not to have abortions to be made without bias, force, and with respect for privacy. More great news for reproductive rights comes to us from the state of Quintana Roo, Mexico, where they just decriminalized abortion. Said to be part of Mexico's Green Wave, demanding greater reproductive rights across Latin America, this decision comes roughly a year after Mexico's Supreme Court declared penalizing abortion unconstitutional. 19 lawmakers voted in favour, with 3 against, approving a change in law that would decriminalise abortion for up to 12 weeks and remove a requirement for rape victims to report their abuser to access abortion. The fight doesn't stop there though. The Quintana Roo Feminist Network said on Twitter, "The struggle is bearing fruit. We will insist that abortion is not only legal, but also free and safe." Voters in the US turned out in several states to vote in favour of abortion rights during their recent midterm election, with those in California, Kentucky, Michigan and Vermont voting to protect abortion access in their states. Nancy Northup, President and CEO for the Centre of Reproductive Rights, declared, "This is a seismic win for abortion rights. First in Kansas and now in Michigan and Vermont, voters are rejecting the Supreme Court's reversal of Roe and issuing a clarion call that they want their rights constitutionally protected. When people can vote directly on abortion in a non-partisan ballot initiative, abortion rights win. Until there is national legislation that protects abortion rights across the country, we will continue to work to ensure that state constitutions protect the right to abortion." 2 men, Aziz, now aged 84, and Islam, who died in 2009, were exonerated by the City of New York for the murder of Malcolm X, and are receiving $36 million for their wrongful convictions that left them incarcerated for decades. Their attorney, David Shanies, stated, "Muhammad Aziz, Khalil Islam and their families suffered because of these unjust convictions for more than 50 years. Police and prosecutorial misconduct caused tremendous damage, and we must remain vigilant to identify and correct injustices. We say there's no reforming this corrupt system. Defund, disarm, dismantle and abolish." Black liberation fighter and revolutionary health worker Mulatu Shakur was granted parole last month. Shakur is now 72 and spent over 26 years behind bars. The decision was made public on November 10th and he is set to be released on December 16th. The decision comes after decades of pressure from activists and the discovery by prison doctors that Shakur only has months left to live. Eugene Puryear, host at Breakthrough News and author of Shackled and Chained, Mass Incarceration in Capitalist America, said, "This is a moment for celebration over and above anything else, and then a continued rededication to free all of the political prisoners who continue to remain behind bars." After 19 years of incarceration without charge in the notorious Guantanamo Bay, Saifullah Paracha, now 75 years old, has been released from US custody and reunited with his family in Pakistan for the first time since 2003. That was the year his life was ruined when FBI agents arrested him and charged him with vague accusations of, quote, financing terrorism. Since September 11, 2001, as many as 779 adults and children are known to have been incarcerated at Gitmo, every single one of them Muslim. His release was agreed upon after it was concluded that he was no longer a threat. No explanation has been given as to why it took so long for him to be released. Paracha described his experience at Guantanamo as like being alive in your own grave. His release is welcome news. Close Guantanamo Bay and end indefinite detention. In the United States, Georgia State Parks and Historic Sites have partnered with the Amy Copeland Foundation to provide free high mobility wheelchairs at 10 state parks, historic sites and a wildlife centre. The all-terrain chairs will offer those with mobility impairments the ability to hit the trails and navigate through mud, water, sand and snow. The chairs are provided free of charge to visitors who qualify, including those with cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, spinal cord injuries, and lower limb amputations. Advanced reservations are required, chair users must get certified, and users must have a buddy with them at all times. So there are some steps to go through to take advantage of this offering, but fortunately the whole process is free. It'll be good to see more options like this being offered going forward in more places so that we can see all of our comrades out on the trails. Thousands of people recently rallied in the streets to celebrate the victory of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva of the Workers' Party of Brazil, PT, who defeated the fascist Jair Bolsonaro in one of the most significant elections in the country's history. Lula received almost 50.9% of the votes, with Bolsonaro receiving 49.1%. Lula is set to be in office from 2023 to 2027. This victory is especially important given that just a few years ago, Lula was jailed on false corruption charges whipped up by reactionaries. Despite principled criticisms that must be levelled against Lula's opportunism and the thousands of troops that he sent to Haiti in service of US imperialism's CIA-backed coup in 2004, this recent electoral victory remains an important win over the forces of far-right extremism, which will hopefully facilitate the development of greater solidarity among progressives in Latin America against US imperialism in the region more broadly. In his address to COP27, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro condemned capitalism and its logic of overproduction and exploitation as responsible for the environmental crisis. He called for urgent climate financing, the preservation of the Amazon rainforest and the indigenous people who are its primary protectors, and highlighted how the hardest hit by the climate crisis are overwhelmingly the poorest and least responsible for it. In a positive step forward, he also announced that he will seek to convene a South American summit in defense of the Amazon with Colombian President Gustavo Petro and Brazilian President-elect Lula da Silva. Equinor has postponed their decision to invest in a new oil field, Wisting, in Norway's far north. Although they cite concerns over costs, the environmental movement in Norway has been very active in recent months protesting the proposed oil fields, which would have been the northernmost field in the world and placed very close to Arctic sea ice and vulnerable wildlife and ecosystems. Protesters are therefore hailing this as a victory for the climate. On November 10th, climate activists in the United States and Europe staged direct actions at private airports, effectively shutting them down by blocking runways and entrances. Actions were carried out at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, the largest private airport in the US, as well as in North Carolina, California, and Washington states. Schiphol Airport, the largest source of carbon dioxide emissions in the Netherlands, was also shut down. Activists in 10 other countries also joined the coordinated action. The airport shutdowns highlighted the immense environmental toll of private aviation and immediately preceded an Oxfam study which found that billionaires emit 1 million times more greenhouse gases than the average person. Private jets are estimated to cause 5 to 14 times as much pollution as commercial planes per passenger and 50 times more than train travel. A spokesperson for Scientist Rebellion, a group of scientists who have turned to climate activism, said that at least 16 scientists in the US and a total of 81 worldwide had taken part in the airport shutdowns. Though arrests were made, the scientists and activists have vowed to continue the fight against the obscene private jet industry. The Animal Liberation Front has claimed the liberation of 800 mink from Pipcorn Farm in Michigan. Anonymous ALF members reported that they were able to easily release the mink from Pipcorn Farm. The members further stated that the mink appeared enlivened and energised as they ran free for the fields. This isn't the first time that animal liberation activists have targeted Pipcorn Farm. In 1999, around 5,000 mink were liberated from the farm in an action also claimed by the ALF. This information came from an open letter written by the owners of Pipcorn Farm, originally published in 1999. Anonymous ALF members stated that their delay in response to the open letter was due to not being born yet and that future actions will have a little faster response time. Right folks, if you have good news to share from the current month, please send your stories to totalliberationpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you to Javi for the positive news jams, thank you to Cosmo for the positive news background, thank you to Nick, Catherine, Ash, Seb, Jacob and Mexi for script writing and production, and thank you to Tristan for editing this video. We're trying to expand our team and output, so if you'd like to support the show, please go to patreon.com/positive leftist news, or you can give us a one-time tip linked in the description box below. Cheers folks, agus slán go fóill.
Most of the times we like to have those good